Okay guys, so let's start building. All right, I've got this community here where I've already built this bot to operate here, but for the purposes of the training, we're going to create another channel. So let's just create another, channel, create a channel, I'm going to call it, so it needs to be threads. I'm going to call it assistant, okay? And I'm not going to make it a default channel. I'm just going to set it. I'm going to set it just for me, but obviously you guys will adjust the settings of the channel, and I'm just gonna give it different emoji. Just gonna give it this emoji for now, just to make it different from everything else. Let's click create, and we've got this assistant channel here. Now, what you need to note is you need to note the ID of the channel as soon as you create it, because we're gonna need this channel as we're building our automations. So let's go into the API keys. So I've got an API key here that I've created already. I've used in Pabbly. So if you haven't created an API key, this is a good time to just click create. Heartbeat will create an API key for you, and you copy, and you need to copy this key and paste it in order to use it with not just Pabbly, but also with the API documentations website, which we're gonna get into right now. Okay, so I am in the API documents website for Heartbeat, and this is where you can perform some basic API functions without actually having to go into anything like Pabbly. So what you need to do is you need to paste the API token here. So I see this is a bit blurred. You guys don't see what my API token is, but you need to paste it here. And then once you paste it here, then we can run some API requests. And the specific API request that we need is right now to get the ID of the channels. So in order to do that, we need to list all the channels that we have. So you've got your bearer token pasted here, click try this, and Heartbeat will respond with the list of your channels. And we need to locate the channel that we've just created, which is assistant. So note this channel ID here. I'm just gonna copy it. I'm going to paste it in a note somewhere. So just typing in my note in my other screen. So assistant channel ID, and pasting this ID that I've created. Okay, now you also need to create the assistant user. So obviously Heartbeat is not Discord. In order to have a bot operate in Heartbeat, you need to actually create a user. So it's not a problem here. You just go to the users section, and you need to create a user here. And I believe it's this one here, the put function. So we need to create a user. That's fine. The user needs to have an email address. Cool. So I'm just gonna type in my email address. From which one should I use? Okay, I'm gonna use my other business email address. Okay, so I've created my email address, and then your name. So here would be the new assistant, the role ID of the user that you should have. Okay, so it needs to have the administrator role ID, but we don't know what that ID is. So for that, we need to go into roles. I'm just not gonna bother blurring anything here. I just don't use this API key, guys, because I'm gonna delete it after I've published this course. Okay, so we just need to get all the roles in here. So the role ID for the administrator is this one. So let me just take note of it, and I've got my notes open. So admin role ID, and I'm just going to paste this role ID. Okay, cool. So let's get back to users, into put, and let me just type in my email address again. And the name is new assistant, and the role ID is. Now you need to paste the role ID for the administrator here. So I'm just going to do it in here. That's done. And the list of group IDs that the user should belong to. We don't, our user doesn't belong to any groups. It's absolutely fine. Bot doesn't need to belong anywhere. So none of these are required unless you want to fill any of these out, but none of these are required. For the profile picture, you can just log in with your email address and then change the profile picture manually. Add a nice bot picture that you can generate in your favorite AI generation tool, but basically none of this is required for the bot to work. So this is all done. Let's click try it, and it's done. Okay, so note the user ID here, whatever that thing is in between the double quotes, and put it in a note. So assistant user ID, and I'm just pasting it in a note in my other screen. Okay, cool. So we've got the channel ID, we've got the assistant user ID, so that's done. Now let's create a Google Sheet. So actually, I'm not going to create a new Google Sheet. I'm just going to show you the structure of the Google Sheet that I've created, and I trust that you guys will do it yourselves. Let me go to my Google Drive. Okay, so I have created a Google Sheet here, which has a very simple structure. So it's got two tables. One is called threads, the other one is called runs. The threads table has two columns, column A and column B. The name of the column A is Heartbeat ID. The name of the column B is OpenAI ID. So use the underscores, as it will be easier for you to operate with these columns. As I mentioned before, the Heartbeat ID is all the new threads that will be started. We're going to host them here. So these will be their IDs. And then the corresponding OpenAI ID will go into here. And then the runs literally needs just one column. You call it published underscore runs. And these are all run IDs, OpenAI run IDs that have been piped into Heartbeat so that the assistant doesn't have to run them again. So now that we've got our Google Sheet created, we need to start building workflows. Okay, so open up Pabbly, and these are my old workflows that are built, so I'm just going to build new workflows. So let's create a folder. I'm just going to create a new HB OpenAI Assistant, and we're going to create a new workflow. We're going to call it new thread mention new thread created new assistant, so that I can remember that it's the new assistant. Okay, cool. So the trigger here will be a webhook. Okay, so this webhook address will work when a new thread is created. So in order to do that, you need to copy this address. Pabbly starts waiting for the response. Then we need to go back into the API of our community and go into webhook, and we need to put a new webhook. The webhook will fire on thread create event. So click here. And the object is the channel ID. Luckily, you've noted the channel ID where the bot will be operating. And in the channel ID, let me just copy and paste that channel ID from the note that I've created earlier. There it is. Boom. And then into here, we need to paste the URL from Pabbly. So let me just get back into Pabbly, copy this URL, get back into here, paste it here. Let's try it. Okay, so this is done. It's live. Now, what we need to do is, in order to test, we need to send some data into this webhook. So let's get back into our community, and let's go back into this new channel assistant, and let's start a new thread. So I'm just going to type in a question already. I'm going to be using my existing MacBook assistant. So I'm just going to type in a question that's somehow relevant to how my MacBooks work. And my question will be, how do I reduce this of the screen? You can add whatever you want in here, but I just wanted something that the assistant can reliably answer. So I'm going to post it here. Let's get back into Pabbly and see if Pabbly caught the response. Okay, so it did. And it gave us the channel, it gave us the thread ID and gave us the channel ID where the thread was published. Okay, what do we need to do? We need to actually get the contents of the thread, because Heartbeat doesn't give us the contents of this thread. No problem. We will need to create an API call. And again, here we're not using the direct integration of Heartbeat. I don't believe it actually has it to get the contents of a thread. Does it? Let me try if it does. Let's see. Create new channel, create, send, add, remove, deactivate, find user group, create user, reactivate user. Yeah. See, that's why it doesn't have this API action in the native integration, but this is absolutely fine. We're just gonna use the API call function here in Pabbly and connect. Now let's get this. So it's going to be a get action, and let's get into the habit of renaming these so you remember what's what. So this would be get the content of the new thread in Heartbeat, what we're actually doing here. And in the API endpoint, so where do you find it? The API endpoint. Let's get back into the API documentation. Let's get into channels. And inside the channels, this is the one, I think, a thread/thread ID. Yeah, this is the one. Get a thread. Cool. Is that right? Yes, that's the one. Get a thread. And you just copy this URL here, get back into Pabbly, paste it here, and just delete this thread ID bit and map the thread ID here from the previous step. And in terms of authentication, you need to select bearer token, and then you need to paste your token here. So let me just copy. Let me copy the token that I've created into here, and that's all you need. And in terms of the how to parse the response, yeah, enable the simple response here from Pabbly, and just save and test this request. So I got the content, and this is the message. Note that Pabbly outputs the message in HTML, and that's precisely why, because we're going to be piping this message into the assistant in OpenAI. We gave the instruction in the system prompt of the assistant in OpenAI that the messages will sometimes be coming in HTML. This is just a simple paragraph. Okay, cool. So the next action that we need to do is we need to create a new thread in OpenAI. Let us open the module, and it will be the OpenAI module here. And the action here is to create a thread. Now I already have the OpenAI connection here established. If you don't have one, just click here, add new connection, and I trust that you will be able to use your OpenAI key that you've created and hopefully stored somewhere to create this connection. So I'm just going to use an existing connection here, and the action is to create a thread. And that's pretty much it, really. So you just need to save and test request, and as you can see, it creates a thread and it gives you a thread ID. Now remember, we have created this sheet in Google Sheets. So as you can see, you already have two IDs. You have the heartbeat thread ID, which we have received from the response of this webhook, the content of this webhook. There it is. And down below, when we've created a new thread in OpenAI, we have an OpenAI thread ID, this little guy here. And at some point in time during this workflow, we're going to be storing them together and mapping them so that we can retrieve them at any point in time. And folks, as it happens, the next step is indeed for us to record the heartbeat thread ID and the corresponding OpenAI thread ID. So let's do that with the Google Sheets action. So Google Sheets, and the action is to add new row. Let's add new row. And then in fact, folks, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into here and I'm going to delete all of these. I'm going to delete all of these published runs so that we don't get ourselves confused. Okay, so I'll get back into the automation here. So action event is to add a new row, click connect, and I already have a connection here. If you don't, just add a new connection, and I trust that you will easily be able to connect Pabbly with your account. So I'm just going to click save here, and I already have the spreadsheet selected here because it's the last spreadsheet that I've actually created in my account, the chatbot operations. But if it isn't, just use this drop-down menu to locate the right sheet. And then the sheet that I need to create is the sheet that I need to select here is indeed threads. And I have two fields here. I've got the heartbeat ID and OpenAI ID. So let's just map some data. Heartbeat ID is this guy here. And then the OpenAI ID is from the OpenAI module. It's this guy here, and let's save and test request. And let's just see if the new row was created. Let's go here, and we've got everything here. Now it created them in bold, so we're just gonna make sure that none of this is in bold because you don't need it in bold. And also probably gonna do the same here. So let's get some dummy stuff here. That's it. It's not in bold. Cool. Make sure all these cells are empty, by the way. Now, okay, so this one is done. Now we need to add the user message into the thread that we have created. So let's go to OpenAI module here in Pabbly. We're going to be using the native module in Pabbly to add the user message into the thread. So be create message inside the thread. Click connect. Use the connection that you have already created. Okay, so now it needs a thread ID. No problem. We've got this thread right here. That's the thread ID. The role is user. The content is, let's see. So it should be just exactly what's been created in Heartbeat, go into the step that's called get content of the new thread in Heartbeat, and the content here, you map it here. Nothing to add here in file IDs. It just allows you to override the file of the files that you have already added to the assistant, but we don't need to do that. So save and send a test request. And as you can see, your message has been added. Note that the model doesn't respond immediately, right? It waits for you to run all the messages in the thread. Now, let's just keep the good discipline and let's rename some of the actions here. So I think this one is self-explanatory. We're creating a new thread, but here we need to call it record heartbeat thread and OpenAI thread in Google Sheet. Okay, something for you to remember what you're actually doing here. This next one here is, well, let's just rename it so that we remember. So this would be add user message to the OpenAI thread. If you keep this discipline, trust me, it will save you a lot of pain later. Okay, cool. So let's get to the next step. What's the next step? Next step is we need to run the thread. Okay, and so for that, we will be using Pabbly's native integration, native module, shall we say. So the action event here will be create a run, and we're going to be using the connection we've established. And then let's just rename it here and say run the OpenAI thread through the assistant. Okay. Now, thread ID, again, we know what thread ID it is. It's the one that we've just created. It's this one. But to be honest, you can even use a map the data from here because it gives you exactly the same thread ID. Now, the assistant ID. So here in the drop-down menu, Pabbly will show you all the assistants that you've created. Now, I've only created the MacBook Genie, so I'm just going to be using this one. But you should see the assistant that you've created here in earlier steps here in the drop-down menu. In terms of the model, I'm going to go full scale on, and I'm just going to use the GPT-4 Turbo. And in order to use the GPT-4 Turbo, you need to use this one, 1106 preview. And then what are the instructions? The instructions, you don't need to add anything here because this will override the basic instructions that you already have for the assistant. So don't put anything in here. And the same as for tools. There's nothing for you to this is an override, and you don't need to add anything here because the default instructions for the assistant is, as you can see here, is to use retrieval and to use these files. So keep these fields completely empty. Okay, so let's keep the simple response and let's click save and test request. So you can see the output here. So OpenAI starts running the thread through the assistant. And so the status is now queued, means that it hasn't started running the thread. And as it runs the thread, it will change the status of this run from queued to then progress to then completed. Every single run also gets an ID. This is the run ID. As you can see, the run ID starts with a run underscore and then this bit of a gibberish to give this run a unique ID. Now, next, what we need to do is we need to start checking on this run to see if its status changed into completed. Now, how do we need to do this? And how many times exactly do we need to check? If you want to be 100% certain that you check enough times and with enough time between every check, I would suggest maybe let's check 6 times. It's up to you. You can try and experiment with different times, different numbers of checks, and different time that passes between the checks. We're just gonna do it with 6. Ultimately, it really depends on how complicated the user message is and how complicated the rest of the setup is, like how many files your assistant needs to parse through. So realistically, the assistant will take about a minute to respond, but in case it takes the assistant less time than a minute, then you might as well pick up the assistant's response. So, by the way, in case you watched Pabbly's own video on how to integrate the assistant API with Pabbly, so what they do here is they just create a delay of 2 minutes, and then they check if the run is completed, and if it is completed, then they publish the response. I think waiting for 2 minutes for the response is bad user experience. It's just too long. and there's no need for that. We're gonna get around it by just checking 6 times for the status of the run, and as soon as it's completed, we're going to pipe the message out into Pabbly, into Heartbeat. So in order to orchestrate this 6 checks, we need to create a count of sorts, right, from 1 to 6. And the way that Pabbly will do this is we need to create an array, a very simple array, which is a list of 6 items. And in order to create an array of 6 items, we're going to use a code module here. Feel free to experiment with anything else that you want. I just found that using code module and just running a very simple JavaScript snippet is the easiest thing to do. Now, I'm going to give you exactly the code to run, and you can do it here. I'm not a developer, so how exactly did I manage to do this? Well, I'll give you a secret weapon, ChatGPT 4, because GPT can run code and it can create code snippets for you. So all I did to come up with this snippet is I said, create a simple JavaScript snippet that generates an array of 6 numbers from 1 to 6 and returns this array in the output. Okay, and let's run this. Let's run this, and this is what it created. So it could have created some other snippet, doesn't really matter. So all we need to do is we need to have an array of 6 numbers. In fact, let's just copy this code snippet. Let me just save the code snippet that it generated for me before. And let me use this code snippet and paste it into Pabbly. The only thing that you need to change, so if you're using ChatGPT to generate your code snippets, it will typically end your snippet with a statement console.log, and you need to change it to return, which is what Pabbly is asking you to do. But let's just see if it will output a simple array, because that's all we need. Let's run it. Okay, so here it did output a simple array, but we need it as an actual array. We don't need it parsed. So switch off this simple response function here, and then that's basically it. Boom. It's all it is, a count from 1 to 6 that we will need to check for the status of the run. That is done. Hopefully you guys know how to use ChatGPT to generate simple code snippets. I can also do Python in case you ever need it. Okay, now that we have an array, we need to iterate through it. So essentially repeat the same action 6 times. And for that, we're going to use iterator module here in Pabbly. And we're going to iterate, connect. We're going to iterate here on the output from step number 7. It sees all arrays that you have. Just click save and test request. That's all you need. Now, the next function is we need to wait. Now, obviously, we've been doing this for quite a while, so this run that we've done, it's now completed, right? But in reality, when this workflow is going to be running, this action will be executed immediately, or almost immediately after the new message is added. So we need to give OpenAI an opportunity to complete the run. So how many seconds shall we give it? Shall we give it 20? Let's give it 20. So in order to do that, the first instinct would have been to use the Pabbly's delay module, but unfortunately, Pabbly doesn't do delays in seconds. It only does it in minutes. I think it's way too long. 1 minute is way too long. So we're going to use the code module again. So click code. And by the way, if you don't know how to code, like me, don't be afraid. It's with the help of ChatGPT and the fact that you can try different things. And I am including all of the code that I've pasted and I'm using everywhere here underneath the video to this lesson. So you can copy and paste it. So I've got this code here. All this does is in here, this code, it generates a timeout of 20 seconds. So this is the number and it's given in milliseconds. So 20,000 milliseconds is 20 seconds. So just save and send test request and it will hopefully wait. I don't know if it's actually going to wait for 20 seconds while it does this, while it does a test run. Sounds like it does. Sorry guys, you'll have to sit here with me and listen to me drone away for 20 seconds. Okay, there you go. So you've waited with me. Thank you for that. Now, we waited for 20 seconds. What's the next thing we need to do? We need to check if we've actually published this run before. In other words, if we've already established that the run is completed and we've published the results of this run already into Heartbeat, we need to stop. We need this workflow to stop because we don't want to be responding to the same message 6 times. The next one is a Google Sheets module, and it will be to look up spreadsheet rows. So let's go to Google Sheets, and we're going to look up spreadsheet rows v2, click connect, use your connection that you have, and we will be looking for information in the runs sheet, and the lookup value in here should be the run ID. So from the run module here, get the run ID, and the lookup columns here will be column A. It's this column here. Let me show it to you. This column A, published runs. So we just need to see if this run's been published. If it isn't, it means that it hasn't been published, and then we need to check if it's completed and then pipe the message from the assistant back into Heartbeat. So it's from A to A. It's just one column, and then it says use sheet headers as keys in response. Yes, why not? It doesn't really matter in the end, but yeah, I've got this no, yes, and top. Okay, simple response is fine. So save and test request. And as you can see, the response rows found gives you the value of 0. And that is exactly the value that we need. So let's just keep naming these modules here. So because otherwise we're going to forget some here. What we're doing is, what are we doing here? Generating an array. So generate a simple array of 6 numbers. And then here we're iterating. Yeah, we can leave it. Here we're creating a 20-second delay. Create a 20-second delay. Okay, and then here in the Google Sheets, what are we doing? We're check if the run has been published. And okay, cool. So the next module here will be a filter. So let's get into Pabbly and create a filter, then filter values, connect it. And what are we going to have in the filter here? We need to filter on the number of rows found to be exactly 0. It means that the run hasn't been piped into Heartbeat and hasn't been published. So if we save and test, the status is success condition is true, because in fact, the value returned by the previous module was 0. Okay, cool. So now we're going to check the status of the run in OpenAI, but Pabbly doesn't have a native module here. Not a problem. We're going to use the Pabbly's API module, and we're going to connect it, and the action event method is get, and then the endpoint. And let me so I'm going to copy and paste it here. And then folks, I'm going to include this endpoint into the notes to this lesson. So you can just copy and paste it. Okay, here's how you're going to do this. So first part is this one, up to threads. Then you need to include the thread ID here. You need to map the thread ID. Go back from the run OpenAI thread through the assistant. There it is. And get the thread ID, which is this one. Then do / runs, and then / and then you need to add the run ID. And the run ID is obviously from here, from run the OpenID thread through the assistant. So it's this run here. Okay. And then for the authentication, thankfully, OpenAI allows us to use a very simple bearer token authentication. And I'm just going to add it here. I've added my bearer token here, and I've managed to blur it. And let's see, what kind of response do we have? What kind of response do we need? So I think we don't need a simple. Let's just run it. Let's see if we need a simpler response or not. Yes, you must provide the OpenAI beta. Yes, completely forgot. Yes, we do. Let's add a header. And in the header, so the label needs to be OpenAI beta. And the value needs to be assistance. Okay. So again, I'll include this in the notes to the lesson. And let's run it. And let's see what it gives us. Okay, cool. So it does give us the status being completed. So this means that we can publish we can retrieve the thread and publish the last message into Heartbeat. So the next module for us here is filter. Yeah. And what are we filtering on? So we are filtering on the status here as being equal to completed, which means that the automation will only progress forward if the status of our run is completed. Okay, and now let's just rename all these functions. This will be progress only if that hasn't been published. And then this one is get the status of the run. Get the status of the run. Okay, and then this one is progress only if the run status is completed, so that we know what we've been doing here. Okay, now if the run is completed, we need to then list messages in the thread. So we're going to use the OpenAI's native module here to list the messages in the thread, and it's the list message. Well, it's actually list messages in the thread, and all we need is a thread ID. So let's get it from this module here, thread ID, and got a simple response enabled here. So let's leave it as it is. And here are the messages. Now, as you can see, data, content, 0, text value. This is the last message in the array of messages here. And this is the message of the assistant. Now, the assistant, as you can see, gave us the message in HTML as we have instructed it to do where? Here in the instructions. So it's putting messages in HTML, specifically with only these tags that are allowed, which is exactly the instruction of Heartbeat. And that is exactly what we're using. Okay. So the next thing we need to do is we need to publish this, we need to post this message into Heartbeat as a comment. Now, because Pabbly does not have a native module to publish anything into Heartbeat as a comment, we're going to be using the API module here. So API, and where do we find the actual endpoint here? Well, again, let's use the API reference for Heartbeat. So we need to publish a comment. Let's go back here, and what do we have here? We've got comments here. Look, this is the comment endpoint. Create a new comment. Well, that's the one that we're going to be using. Okay, so here we go. That is the endpoint, and the type of the request is put. Let us select put here, and let's post the endpoint right here. Now the payload type is indeed JSON, leave it as it is. And then authentication would be bearer token, and just paste your Heartbeat into here. Right, now we need to create some parameters. Okay, like here, set parameters. Okay, so the first parameter is, and by the way, I'm just gonna obviously list all these parameters that you need to include, but where do you find these parameters? Like, how do you know what to put in here? You need to go into here, into the API documentations, and this is exactly what they're telling you: text, thread ID, and parent comment ID, and user ID if you want to be responding from the specific user, which we do because we have created that user, and that user is our bot. So let's get back to Pabbly. Okay, so the first parameter that we need to add is text. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to mention the user who added the initial message, who started the thread. So click at, and then let's find the user ID. And where do we get the user ID from? Let's have a look. Oh, there you go. We get it from the second action here, from the get content of the new thread. User ID, there it is. So that is the user ID. So now we've mentioned the user ID, and then we can go and we can add the content of the assistant response, and this would be from this last module here. And then let's find it. There you go. And there it is. So that is done. Now, then we need a parameter that's called, actually, I'm going to go and copy and paste it. So there you go, parent comment ID. Copy it, then go into Pabbly, paste it. Now, parent comment ID is if we're responding to someone else's comment, but we're not. We're responding to a new thread. So here we're typing in null because we don't have a parent comment ID. Okay, next parameter is the thread ID. So again, I'm lazy. I'm gonna go and copy and paste it from the API docs, thread ID, and the value is, okay, so we need to find the thread ID. Where's the thread ID? There it is. This is the thread ID. Okay. Do we need anything else? Yes, we need a user ID because we're impersonating the bot user. So I'm just going to type this one. It's easier to do it. User ID. And then remember you noted down the user ID of the bot user that you've created in Heartbeat. Copy it and paste it from your notes into here. Okay. Now, shall we test it? This is the drum roll. But let's see. Sounds like it might have worked. Let's go back into the community. And lo and behold, we have the assistant responding to us nicely in rich text in the HTML. Beautiful. That's exactly what we need. Amazing. Gosh, I'm speaking like Gordon Ramsay that's just cooked a nice dish. It's concerning. Okay. You might disagree that I have the Gordon Ramsay's tone, but hey ho. Now, let's not forget to rename our steps. So this would be list all messages in the OpenAI thread. Okay, and this is add a new comment to Heartbeat. Okay, done. Now, the last step that we need to do is, because this, effectively what we've done is we've published the run, because the run gave us, the run status is complete, we've published the run. We need to record this run as published, because if we don't do that, remember we have an iterator module here. There it is. And it's iterating on an array that we've created, which is the array of 6 numbers. So it's going to run all of these steps in the branch 6 times, right? Do we want 6 responses here? No, we don't. How do we prevent Pabbly from publishing 6 responses? We need to record that as soon as we have published a new comment to Heartbeat, we need to add this run ID as published into the Google Sheet that we've created. So the last step in this workflow is Google Sheets, and it will be an add new row action. Add new row, and the sheet is chatbot operations. So that's the spreadsheet, and the sheet within is the runs. We just need to put in published runs, and we need the run ID. So when it says the module run the OpenAI thread through the assistant, run ID, it's this guy here. So let's do it. And I think this is all good. Let's go into here. Yep, it published the run, and let's just make sure it's not in bold. This concludes the lesson, but let's just test it. This workflow is running, so let's create another thread and see if the assistant will respond. How do I change the battery? In fact, I know that you can't change the battery. So the workflow is now running. And as you remember, there's a delay of 20 seconds that we're giving to the first check. And then if there's nothing found, if there's no response found, then we're going to do another 20-second check. And there's 6 of them. And we're going to check 6 times. But as we're waiting for our workflow to run the thread and to extract the response, it's just done it. As you can see, it's including sources here. See that? Now, this is something that you would need to work with in here with your instructions, whether you want sources to be given out. So in the next lesson, we're going to build another workflow where we're going to be responding to comments. So now if someone wanted to respond to the assistant like this, so the assistant is mentioned, or if someone is responding here and mentioning the assistant, and it should generate exactly the same response. See you there.